Some people grow up in the warmth of a family's love, a comforting sun that shines on everyone equally. I grew up in my brother's shadow. It was a cold, dark place where the sun only ever seemed to shine on him. My parents handed him the world on a silver platter, and they handed me the bill, paid in silence and invisibility. They spent a lifetime telling me he was everything and I was nothing. And the funny thing is, they were right about one of us. This is the story of how I finally stepped out of that shadow and into the light, a light so bright it burned the people who kept me in the dark for so long. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or just plain invisible, then you're going to want to hear this. Stick around and maybe press that subscribe button so you don't miss stories like this one, because the taste of vindication is something we can all appreciate. My childhood home wasn't a home. It was a museum. A living, breathing monument to my brother Daniel's potential. From the moment you walked through the front door, you were assaulted by it. The living room mantelpiece groaned under the weight of his trophies, plastic golden figures frozen in the act of kicking a soccer ball or holding a miniature tennis racket. The walls were a carefully curated gallery of his life. Daniel's first steps, Daniel's first t-ball game, Daniel on the shoulders of his teammates, his face split in a triumphant grin. My father's study, the heart of the house, had a single, massive, framed photograph on the desk. A 10-year-old Daniel in a suit 2 sizes too big, looking serious and important. My father called it the chairman. And me? My presence in this museum was archival. Tucked away in a dusty photo album on the bottom shelf of the bookcase, there were a few faded pictures of a quiet, dark-haired girl with eyes that seemed too big for her face. Often I was just a blurry figure in the background of one of Daniel's heroic shots. There was one spot on the hallway wall, a sun-bleached patch of wallpaper between 2 of Daniel's school portraits, where a picture of me had once hung. It had been taken down to make room for a framed certificate celebrating his win in the regional science fair, a project, I might add, that I had done most of the research for. No one ever bothered to put my picture back up. After a while, I stopped noticing it was gone. You get used to being an afterthought. The rule was unwritten, but it was as solid as the foundation of the house. Daniel was the investment. I was the expense. "Our son is going to do great things," my father would declare at dinner parties, his voice booming with a pride that was almost theatrical. He'd clap Daniel on the back, making him stand a little taller. "He has that spark, you see? You can't teach that." Our guests would nod and murmur their agreement, their eyes shining as they looked at the golden boy. Then, if their gaze happened to drift over to me, my father would add, almost as a footnote, "And Amelia will be there to support him." That's what a good sister does. Support. In my family, support was a synonym for sacrifice. When I was 10, Daniel decided he wanted to learn the piano. My parents bought a beautiful, polished upright piano that took up an entire wall of the living room. Cost was astronomical, something my mother mentioned in hushed, stressed tones on the phone to my grandmother. But for Daniel, no expense was too great. He took lessons for 6 months. The house was filled with the clumsy, stuttering sounds of his half-hearted practice. He complained constantly. He hated the teacher, his fingers hurt, it was boring. After 6 months, he quit. The piano then became the world's most expensive shelf, a place to display more of his trophies. A year later, I found an old beat-up guitar at a garage sale. It was $10. I'd saved up my allowance for 2 months to buy it. I fell in love with it. I would sit in my room for hours, my fingers raw, teaching myself chords from a book I'd checked out of the library. The music I made was clumsy, yes, but it was mine. It was the only thing in that house that felt like it belonged to me. One evening, my father stood in my doorway, a frown creasing his brow. Quiet, melodic strumming died under his gaze. "Amelia, what is all this?" he asked, his tone heavy with disapproval. "You should be focusing on your studies. Not this noise. Stop dreaming. Your brother has the artistic talent in this family. You need to be practical." He didn't say it, but the message was clear. There was only enough room for one star in our family's solar system, and my job was simply to be a cold, dark moon reflecting his light. The inequality was woven into the very fabric of our lives. When school started, Daniel would get a brand new wardrobe. My father would take him to the expensive department stores downtown, and he'd come back laden with bags, the smell of new clothes and leather shoes filling the car. My mother would then take me to the local thrift store, her lips a thin, apologetic line. "It's more sensible this way, honey," she'd murmur, sifting through racks of worn, faded clothes that smelled of other people's lives. "You grow so fast, and Daniel, well, he needs to make a good impression." I learned to be a ghost in my own home. I moved quietly. I spoke when spoken to. I made my needs as small as possible until they were nearly invisible. While my parents poured their time, money, and emotional energy into Daniel's every whim, fencing lessons he'd quit after a month, a high-tech telescope he used twice, a summer camp for future leaders from which he came back with nothing but a tan, I learned to rely on myself. My bedroom was my sanctuary. While the sound of Daniel laughing with friends or the blare of his video games filled the rest of the house, my room was silent, save for the whisper of turning pages. I studied with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. Every on a report card was a silent act of rebellion. It was a piece of myself that they couldn't give to him. But even that was twisted to serve their narrative. I remember one night I brought home a report card with straight A's. I'd worked tirelessly for it, staying up late every night, my eyes burning from the dim light of my desk lamp. I shyly handed it to my father at the dinner table. He glanced at it, gave a single perfunctory nod, and said, "Good, Amelia." Very responsible. "You see, Daniel? Your sister knows how important it is to keep her grades up. When you're out there changing the world, you'll need a reliable sister like her to manage the details." Daniel, who had gotten 2 C's and a D, just shrugged, a smirk playing on his lips. "Don't worry, Dad. I'm a big picture guy. I'll hire people like Amelia to handle the small stuff." My parents chuckled. My mother patted Daniel's arm affectionately. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. The on my report card suddenly felt worthless. It wasn't a measure of my intelligence or my hard work. It was just a demonstration of my usefulness to him. I looked down at my plate, my food suddenly tasting like ash. The world saw a quiet, dutiful daughter, a responsible student. But inside, a silent strategist was taking notes. I was learning. I was watching. And I was waiting. The silence they imposed on me became my greatest weapon. Because while they were all busy talking about Daniel's brilliant future, I was quietly building my own. While they were distracted by his dazzling light, they never saw the fire I was starting in the shadows. They thought they were raising one success and one supporter. They had no idea they were forging a rival. It was the first secret I ever kept, the first part of my life that was truly mine. And it was the first brick in the foundation of the woman I was determined to become. High school was where the paths my parents had laid for us began to diverge, not in a gentle curve but in a sharp, jarring split. For Daniel, it was an extension of his kingdom. He was popular, charming, and coasted on a sea of natural charisma. Teachers loved him, even when his homework was late. Girls swooned over his easy smile. He was elected class president not because of his ideas but because he looked the part. My father was ecstatic. He bought a glass display case just for the cheap wooden gavel Daniel was given at the ceremony. For me, high school was a laboratory. I was a quiet observer in the back of the class, the one who always had the right answer but never raised her hand unless called upon. I joined the debate team not to be popular but to learn how to structure an argument, how to dismantle an opponent's logic piece by piece. I joined the school newspaper not to be in the social mix but to learn how to ask questions and, more importantly, how to see the story hidden beneath the surface. These weren't hobbies, they were skills. Every activity was a tool I was sharpening for a future they couldn't envision for me. My real work began after the last school bell rang. I got a job bussing tables at a greasy spoon diner on the edge of town. The air was thick with the smell of old coffee and fried onions. The floor was perpetually sticky. I'd come home late, my clothes smelling of grease, my feet aching with a deep, throbbing pain. I'd slip in through the back door, quiet as a mouse, and scrub my hands raw at the kitchen sink, trying to wash away the evidence of my other life. My mother found out one evening when she came into my room without knocking. I was sitting on my floor, counting a small, wrinkled pile of dollar bills and coins. It was just over $80, the result of 2 weeks of grueling work. Her eyes widened, first in confusion, then in a sort of pained disapproval. "Amelia, what is this?" she asked, her voice a strained whisper. "Where did you get this money?" "I have a job," I said, my voice flat. I didn't look up from my counting. "A job? Why on earth would you need a job? If you need something, you ask us." I finally looked up at her, and the bitterness I'd been swallowing for years rose in my throat. "Really?" I asked. "Because when I asked for a new pair of jeans because mine have holes in the knees, you told me to learn how to sew. When I asked for $50 for the school science trip, you told me money was tight. But when Daniel wanted a brand new $300 gaming console last week, the money wasn't tight then, was it?" A flicker of shame, or maybe just discomfort, crossed her face. She sat on the edge of my bed, her hands twisting in her lap. "It's different, Amelia. Your brother, he has a lot of pressure on him. He needs an outlet. And he needs to have the right things to fit in. It's important for his future. And my future isn't?" Question hung in the air between us, cold and sharp. She didn't have an answer. She just sighed a long, weary sound. "Hide this," she said, gesturing to the money. "Don't let your father see it. He'll be furious." It wasn't an offer of support. It was a command to keep my messy, inconvenient reality out of sight, to not disrupt the perfect portrait of the family they were painting. I hid the money in a loose-lidded shoebox at the back of my closet, but I didn't stop working. Every dollar I earned felt like a small rebellion. The ultimate goal of my secret life was singular: escape. I knew my parents would never pay for me to go to college, not a good one anyway. Their college fund, the one they'd started when we were babies, had been unofficially renamed Daniel's College Fund years ago. So, while Daniel was out at parties, I was in the public library until closing time, poring over scholarship application guides. While he was learning how to hold his liquor, I was learning how to write a compelling personal essay. My guidance counselor was the first adult who ever truly saw me. Kind, harried woman named Mrs. Gable. I sat in her cluttered office, the walls covered in university pennants, and for the first time I told someone my plan. I wanted to study international business. I wanted to go to a school on the other side of the country, maybe even abroad. She looked at my transcript, my test scores, and my list of extracurriculars. A slow smile spread across her face. "Amelia," she said, her voice filled with a genuine warmth that startled me, "you can go anywhere you want. Your application it's stellar." She saw intelligence, not just reliability. She saw ambition, not just quiet obedience. In her eyes, I wasn't Daniel's sister. I was just Amelia. And it was intoxicating. The acceptance letters began to arrive in the spring of my senior year. Small, thin envelopes of rejection and thick, heavy envelopes of possibility. I hid them all in the shoebox with my money. The one I was waiting for was from a prestigious university in England that offered a full, life-changing scholarship for international students. It was the longest of long shots. The day it arrived, I saw the distinctive blue airmail envelope in the mailbox, and my heart hammered against my ribs. I snatched it before anyone else could see it and ran to my room, locking the door behind me. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely tear it open. I read the first line, "We are delighted to offer you a place." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there on my floor, the letter clutched in my hand, and a profound, bone-deep sense of calm washed over me. It was real. I had done it. I had built my own door out of that house, and I had just been handed the key. Telling my parents was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I broke the news at dinner. Daniel had just spent 10 minutes bragging about getting into the state university, a school he'd been accepted to mostly because my father was a prominent alumnus who made generous donations. "That's wonderful, son," my father had beamed. "We'll get you a new car for graduation." Then I cleared my throat. The sound was small in the sudden silence. "I have some news, too," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I've been accepted to a university. In England. I received a full scholarship." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. My father stared at me, his fork halfway to his mouth. My mother's smile froze on her face. Daniel just looked baffled. "England," my father finally said, his voice flat, stripped of all its usual booming pride. "What are you talking about? Your place is here. Your school is here. The scholarship covers everything," I pressed on, my voice growing stronger. "Tuition, room and board, everything. It's an incredible opportunity." "It's impractical," he snapped. "And it's selfish. Your family is here. Your brother is starting a new chapter. He'll need your support." The old argument. The default setting. But for the first time, it had no power over me. "I'm going," I said, and the finality in my own voice surprised me. "I leave in August." The years that followed were a blur of exhilarating hard work. While Daniel was at State U, my parents' money insulated him from reality. His letters home, or rather his infrequent brief phone calls, were a litany of casual requests. He needed money for new books, for fraternity dues, for a ski trip with his new friends. My parents always obliged. They saw it as investing in his networking and social development. I heard through the family grapevine that he changed his major 3 times, from business to political science to, for a brief, bewildering period, philosophy. He was searching for a passion, my mother explained, as if his aimlessness were a noble quest. Meanwhile, I was thousands of miles away, living a life they couldn't imagine. I was in lecture halls that were hundreds of years old, debating economic theory with students from every corner of the globe. I worked 2 jobs to cover my personal expenses, one in the university library, surrounded by the comforting smell of old paper and knowledge, and another waiting tables at a small pub, where I learned to understand the thick, regional accents and the dry, British humor. I was perpetually exhausted, but I had never felt more alive. I was building a life, not as a reflection of someone else, but on my own terms. I was nobody's sister. I was just Amelia. Daniel dropped out of college in his junior year. The news came to me in a terse email from my mother. It was framed not as a failure, but as a strategic pivot. "Daniel has decided the formal education system is too restrictive for his entrepreneurial spirit," she wrote. "He has some exciting business ideas he wants to pursue." The exciting business ideas turned out to be a series of predictable flameouts. There was the artisan toast delivery service, the subscription box for curated dog toys, and a vague plan to become a social media influencer. Each one was launched with a flurry of excitement and a significant cash injection from my father, and each one fizzled out within months, leaving behind nothing but credit card debt and a few branded t-shirts. After my graduation, I didn't come home. I got a job at a small tech startup in London. I started at the bottom, making coffee and answering phones, but I watched everything. I learned about venture capital, market scaling, user acquisition. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by cheap coffee and a burning, relentless ambition. Quiet girl who was told to stop dreaming was now sitting in boardrooms, her voice steady and clear as she presented market projections. I came home for the first time in almost 8 years for Christmas. I was 29 years old. I had just sold the company I had helped build from a 2-person operation in a damp basement to a thriving international enterprise. The numbers in my bank account were staggering, enough to buy my parents' house 10 times over. Pulling up to the curb in my rental car, a sleek, quiet luxury sedan, I saw the house looked smaller. Paint was peeling slightly around the window frames. A few weeds pushed through the cracks in the driveway. It was the same museum, but the exhibits were looking a little tired. The welcome was awkward. My parents hugged me, but it was stiff, uncertain. They didn't know what to do with this version of me. This woman in a well-tailored coat who carried a leather briefcase. Daniel was there. He had moved back home 6 months prior after his last business venture, some kind of app for rating public restrooms, had failed spectacularly. He was heavier. His charming smile from high school now looked forced and a little desperate. He tried to be nonchalant, leaning against the kitchen counter and making a joke about me joining the dark side of corporate life. It didn't land. The entire visit felt like walking through a dream I'd almost forgotten. Conversation was strained, full of long, awkward silences. They would ask me vague questions about my life in London, but their eyes would glaze over when I tried to explain what my company actually did. It was too foreign, too far outside the narrow confines of the world they had built. All their conversational energy was reserved for Daniel's latest prospects. He was in talks with some people. He had a game-changing idea he was developing. It was the same old story, but the booming confidence in my father's voice was gone. Now it was tinged with a desperate hope. They had spent 2 decades looking right through me. Now they didn't know how to look at me at all. They saw the expensive coat and the confident posture, but they had no frame of reference for the woman wearing them. As I left to go back to my hotel, I had politely declined their offer to stay in my old, cramped childhood bedroom. I felt a strange mix of pity and detachment. Power dynamic in that house had fundamentally, irrevocably shifted. The sun was setting on the golden boy, and they were all still squinting, trying to pretend it was noon. They had no idea just how dark it was about to get. Returning to the States wasn't just a move, it was a strategic acquisition of my own life. I didn't settle back in my hometown. That would have been like a butterfly forcing itself back into the chrysalis. Instead, I established my new headquarters in the city, a glittering landscape of steel and glass just a 2-hour drive away, close enough to be a presence but far enough to be untouchable. My new life was the antithesis of my childhood. My home was a minimalist penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the skyline. It was clean, spacious, and filled with light. There were no dusty trophies, no faded photographs of a favored child. The only art on the walls was art that I had chosen, that spoke to me. It was a space that answered to no one's history but my own. My office was even more symbolic. It was the corner office on the top floor of one of the city's newest skyscrapers. I had designed the space myself. One wall was a massive pane of glass overlooking the bustling city below. The others were lined with sleek, built-in bookshelves not filled with photo albums but with books on market strategy, global economics, and coding languages. My desk was a single massive piece of polished oak, clean and uncluttered. It was more than an office, it was a fortress. A throne room. From here I could see the world and the world could see me, but they could only get to me if I buzzed them in. I had started a new venture, a consulting firm that specialized in helping European tech companies break into the American market. It was a niche I understood better than anyone. My days were a whirlwind of conference calls with Zurich, presentations to venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, and lunches with CEOs. I wore bespoke suits that felt like armor, and I walked into boardrooms filled with men twice my age and commanded their attention, not with a booming voice but with data, logic, and an unshakable confidence I had earned through thousands of hours of relentless work. Quiet, invisible girl was gone. In her place was a woman who had learned that power wasn't something you were given, it was something you took. My relationship with my family settled into a strange, distant rhythm. My mother would call every Sunday. The conversations were stilted, a dance around the 2 massive elephants in the room, my success and Daniel's failure. She'd talk about the weather, about a neighbor's new puppy, about anything and everything to avoid the core subjects. She'd ask about my work in the same tone one might ask about a peculiar but uninteresting hobby. "So, you're still busy with the computers?" she'd ask. "It's a consulting firm, Mom. We advise on international market entry," I'd reply for the 10th time. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she'd say, her lack of understanding a palpable thing over the phone line. Then her voice would brighten. "You'll never guess what. Daniel has a new idea. It's brilliant. It's like Uber, but well, he explained it to me, it's very clever. He's meeting with a potential investor next week. potential investor never materialized. The game-changing idea would be replaced by another one a month later. I would listen, making non-committal sounds, a silent observer to their slow-motion collapse. They never asked me for money, not directly. But the hints were getting heavier. My father, during one of our rare, awkward phone calls, mentioned offhandedly that his property taxes had gone up. My mother lamented the cost of a new furnace. It was a test. They were dipping a toe in the water, seeing if I would offer. I never did. This wasn't my debt to pay. True turning point, the moment I knew the endgame was approaching, came during a dinner. They had insisted on driving into the city to take me out for my 30th birthday. They chose a stuffy, old-fashioned Italian restaurant with red velvet booths and waiters in tuxedos, a place they thought someone like me would appreciate. The entire meal was excruciating. My father tried to engage me about my business, but he was hopelessly out of his depth. He kept trying to frame my success in terms he could understand. "So, you're like a secretary, but for very important people?" he asked, genuinely trying to grasp it. "No, Dad. I'm the CEO. I'm the important person," I said, not unkindly, but with a firmness that made him blink. Daniel was a mess. He was wearing a suit that was clearly 10 years old and a size too small, the fabric straining at the buttons. He spent the entire dinner trying to act like a peer. He'd drop names of tech billionaires as if they were old friends and talk about market trends he'd clearly just read about on a blog that morning. He then tried, clumsily, to pitch me one of his ideas, a social network for people to share pictures of their food. "It's huge, Amelia," he said, his eyes gleaming with a desperate, unearned confidence. "Imagine Instagram, but only for food. We'd monetize through partnerships with restaurants. You could get in on the ground floor. With your connections and a small seed investment from you, we could be bigger than Facebook." I just looked at him, my fork hovering over my pasta. I didn't laugh. I didn't mock him. I just gave him the same cool, analytical gaze I gave to founders who pitched me terrible ideas every week. "The market is saturated, Daniel," I said calmly. "The user acquisition cost would be astronomical, and your monetization strategy is based on a market that has notoriously thin margins. CAC to LTV ratio would be upside down from day one. It's a non-starter." He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. I hadn't just rejected his idea. I had spoken a language he didn't understand, from a world he couldn't enter. For the first time, he saw the true gulf between us. He wasn't the big-picture guy, and I wasn't the detail-oriented girl anymore. I was the architect of an empire, and he was a guy with a bad idea. He was silent for the rest of the meal. After that night, I knew he would come to me. It was inevitable. The family's financial situation was clearly worsening. My parents had taken out a second mortgage on their house to fund Daniel's last failed venture. Their savings were gone. Their pride was the only thing they had left, and it was running on fumes. The preparation for his arrival wasn't a conscious, malicious plot. It was simply the continuation of my life. I didn't have to set a trap. I just had to wait for him to walk into the world I had built. The revenge wasn't something I needed to orchestrate. It was the life I was living. My success was the ultimate checkmate, and I had been positioning the pieces on the board for over a decade. I would sit in my glass-walled office late at night, long after my employees had gone home, and I'd look out at the endless glittering lights of the city. I'd think about the girl in the thrift store clothes, hiding her $10 guitar and her crumpled dollar bills. I'd think about the sting of being invisible, the constant dull ache of being second best. And I would feel not anger, but a sort of crystalline calm. The universe has a way of balancing its books. For years, the scales had been tipped so far in his favor that it felt like they would break. Now I could feel them beginning to move. The slow, heavy, inexorable swing back to equilibrium. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon. It was my mother. Her voice was thin, frayed with a panic she was trying desperately to conceal. "Amelia, honey," she began, her attempt at cheerfulness painfully transparent. "How are you?" Still busy with the computers? I'm fine, Mom. What's wrong? I asked, cutting through the pretense. There was a pause, and then I heard a choked sob. It's your brother, she whispered. He's in some trouble. He owes some people money. A lot of money. They're not very nice people, Amelia. He needs help. We can't help him. I leaned back in my leather chair, my eyes drifting to the city below. The tiny cars moved along the streets like blood cells in the city's veins. Everything was orderly, logical, cause and effect. Where is he? I asked. He's coming to see you, she said, her voice cracking. He's on his way to your office right now. Please, Amelia. He's your brother. I swiveled my chair to face the door of my office. My reflection stared back at me from the polished glass, a woman, calm and composed, at the center of her own universe. I felt my heartbeat slow and steady. The waiting was over. The king, it seemed, was about to come begging at the gates of the castle the nobody had built. The intercom on my desk buzzed 40 minutes later. My assistant's voice was crisp and professional. Ms. Vance, Mr. Daniel Vance is here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I looked at the city spread out before me, a kingdom of my own making. Send him in, Sarah, I said, my voice perfectly even. The door to my office opened with a soft, expensive click. And there he was. The golden boy. The chairman. My brother. The years had not been kind. Charm that had once been his currency was now a cheap plating, flaking off to reveal the desperate metal beneath. His suit was a rumpled, off-the-rack affair that hung awkwardly on his frame. His face was pale, his eyes darting around my office, taking in the scale of it, the quiet, terrifying hum of success. He looked like a stray dog that had wandered into a palace. He tried for one of his old easy smiles, but it was a pained, crooked thing. Amelia, he began, his voice trying for a breezy confidence he no longer possessed. Wow. You've done well for yourself. This place is something else. I didn't stand up. I didn't smile back. I simply gestured to one of the two sleek, minimalist chairs opposite my desk. Daniel, what do you want? The directness of the question seemed to throw him. He was used to a world of softened edges and gentle deflections, a world my parents had built to protect him from anything unpleasant. He sat down heavily, his hands fidgeting on his knees. He looked small in that chair, dwarfed by the space, by the view, by the sheer, unapologetic weight of my success. Right. Yeah. Getting straight to it, he mumbled, attempting a chuckle that came out as a dry cough. Look, Leah, I'm in a bit of a tight spot. A temporary cash flow problem with my latest venture. You know how it is. Startup life. I said nothing. I just watched him, my expression unreadable. The silence stretched, becoming its own form of pressure. He started to sweat. The thing is, he continued, his voice dropping, losing its bluster, I owe some money. A loan I took out to get things off the ground. And the guys I borrowed from, they're not exactly patient. I just need a little help. A loan. Just to get back on my feet. I'll pay you back, of course. With interest. Soon as my new app takes off. There it was. The moment the entire arc of our lives had been bending toward. For a split second, I saw him not as the desperate man in the ill-fitting suit, but as the boy king of our childhood. The boy who got the piano, the telescope, the new clothes. The boy who never had to ask, only had to exist to be given the world. I could hear my father's voice echoing in the vast, silent space of my memory. He's everything. You're nothing. But the echo was faint now. Distant. Past was a ghost, and it had no power here. I was the one behind the big desk now. I was the one with the kingdom at my back. I leaned back in my chair, the expensive leather creaking softly. I steepled my fingers, studying him as if he were a line item on a balance sheet that didn't add up. Tell me something, Daniel, I said, my voice soft, almost conversational. It was the softness, I think, that scared him more than shouting would have. Growing up, what did you think I was going to be? He blinked, confused by the question. What? I don't know. A teacher? A librarian? Something quiet. Quiet, I repeated, nodding slowly. Responsible. Person who handles the details. The small stuff. That's what you said, isn't it? At the dinner table, after I got a perfect report card and you got a D. A dark flush crept up his neck. He remembered. Amelia, I was a kid. We were all just kids. We were, I agreed. But the roles were set, weren't they? You were the big picture guy, the artist, the entrepreneur, the one with the spark. And I was the sensible, practical one. The support system. I was told my only purpose was to help you along, to be a footnote in the story of your success. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the cool surface of my desk. My voice never rose. It was as sharp and clear as the glass wall behind me. You know, I said, I grew up hearing I was nobody. That my dreams were just noise. Funny how the nobody ended up here in this office, running a company that's worth more than every brilliant idea you've ever had combined. Funny how the person who was supposed to handle the small stuff ended up with the big picture. And funny how the everything, the golden boy, ended up in my office asking for help. The flush on his neck had spread to his entire face. He was shifting in his chair now, unable to meet my eyes. He looked at the floor, at his own worn shoes. The arrogance he had worn his entire life like a second skin was gone, stripped away, leaving only the raw, pathetic desperation. So will you help me? He whispered. The words were small, pathetic. King was begging. This was the moment. Culmination. All the pain, all the invisibility, all the quiet rage had been forged over decades into this single perfect point in time. I had the power to save him or to let him drown. I could write a check and solve his problems, becoming the supporter they always wanted me to be. Or I could do what they had done to me my entire life. I could turn my back. A smile touched my lips. It wasn't a warm smile. It was calm, and it was sharp, and it held 30 years of history within it. I'll think about it, I said. The 3 words hung in the air between us. It wasn't a yes. It wasn't a no, it was something far crueler. It was uncertainty. It was powerlessness. It was the same hollow, gut-wrenching feeling they had given me 1,000 times when I had asked for something, anything, for myself. I was handing him back the same empty plate he had been serving me my whole life. For the first time in his life, Daniel's future was not in his own hands or our parents' hands. It was in mine. And he had no idea what I would do. The terror in his eyes was my answer. He would never forget this. He would never again see me as the quiet girl in the background. He left without another word, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As the door clicked shut behind him, I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding for 30 years. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. It was the vibration of a massive weight, a weight I had carried since birth, finally being set down. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city. It didn't look like a kingdom anymore. It just looked like a city. My city. And my phone rang an hour later. It was my mother. I knew what it would be. Amelia! What did you do? She shrieked, her voice hysterical. Daniel just called me. He was crying. He said you wouldn't help him. How could you be so cruel? He's your brother. He's family. Yes, he is, I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. And for his entire life, you and Dad taught him that family would always be his safety net. You taught him that he didn't need to work hard, that he didn't need to be responsible, because his sensible, practical sister would be there to manage the details. You taught him that he could fail upwards forever, because his family would always be there to break his fall. I paused, letting the words sink in. You were wrong, I said. The safety net is closed. I ended the call before she could reply. I never gave him the money. His life, from what I heard through distant family gossip, spiraled further. He had to declare bankruptcy. The not nice people repossessed his car. He ended up taking a menial hourly wage job, the kind of job I'd had in the diner all those years ago. Kind of job that builds character or breaks it. The revenge wasn't in his ruin. I took no pleasure in his suffering. The real revenge, the true victory, was in that moment in my office. It was in the shattering of the lifelong myth they had all believed, the myth of Daniel's superiority and my insignificance. The revenge was in the final, undeniable reversal of our roles. He wasn't everything, and I most certainly was not nothing. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that sun-bleached patch of wallpaper in the hallway of my childhood home. For years, I saw it as a symbol of my erasure. But now I see it differently. It was just an empty space. A blank canvas. And I was the one who got to decide what picture to hang there. And I chose to paint a masterpiece. They say the best revenge is living well. I used to think that was a cliché, a comforting lie people tell themselves when they don't have the power to fight back. But I've learned that it's true with one small addition. The best revenge is living well and making sure the people who wronged you have a front row seat to see it. It wasn't about destroying my brother, it was about building myself. It was about taking the label of nothing they gave me and proving that nothing is a powerful thing. Nothing to lose. Nothing to hold you back. From nothing you can build everything. True power isn't about having a safety net. It's about learning to fly, so you no longer need one. The scales of justice don't always balance themselves. Sometimes you have to put your own thumb on the scale. Have you ever had to become your own hero to rewrite the story everyone else wrote for you? Let me know your story in the comments below. And if you found this satisfying, don't forget to like and subscribe. There's always more justice to be served.